After a long and contentious committee hearing, House Republicans successfully advanced their baseless articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in an effort that was condemned not only by House Democrats, but also prominent conservative legal, constitutional, and immigration scholars, and, of course, Fox News liberal commentator Jessica Tarlov. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to play in this video, but here's the recap. So throughout all of 2023, House Republicans' primary political project was to impeach President Biden. It's not gone well. The polling is strongly against it. We have never successfully impeached and convicted a president, right? So this thing is almost certainly destined for failure. But because it's an election year and House Republicans have nothing else to hang their hats on, they're using the tool of impeachment because that's one of the few exclusive tools of the House of Representatives, which they very narrowly control, against other aspects of the Biden administration. And since immigration tends to be a winning issue for Republicans, at least in the polls, they decided to use that, opportunity and that exclusive tool of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, because his department is responsible for enforcing immigration policy. But again, the move is widely condemned, right? Because the notion is you're supposed to impeach people for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And as is the case with President Biden, House Republicans aren't able to point to treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. They just don't like the policies of the Biden administration and don't feel that Mayorkas is successfully enforcing border policy. We'll unpack all of that, but that's the context. The last thing I'll point out is they've advanced it from the Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives, and now it's going to have to go and be voted on by a full vote of the House of Representatives. And it may or may not pass, right? Because all you need is a simple majority. And on paper, Republicans do have the numbers barely to pull it off. But even if they manage to do that, it will die in the Senate. There's no way that Mayorkas will be convicted even if he is impeached. So with all that in mind, I want to play this 2-minute clip from Jessica Tarlov on the Fox Propaganda Network, the only sane voice, of course. She's doing the Lord's work, as Southern Christians would say, and we'll unpack it from there.
But having policy disagreements is not grounds for impeachment, and that's how Benny Thompson, who's the ranking Democrat in the committee hearing, opened by saying, you haven't gone to high crimes and misdemeanors. And Benny Thompson's view of this was confirmed by our very own Jonathan Turley, who was on saying, I don't think they've established any of those bases for impeachment. Then you have former GOP DHS Secretary Michael Chertoff writing in the Wall Street Journal, again, saying, Republicans are trying to get around doing the hard work. Drop this impeachment. Former GOP chair, Congresswoman Barbara Comstock, same thing. This is going to shrink the majority, which is already razor thin, certainly down to George Santos. You have the opportunity to do a deal. And Newt Gingrich was on air last night, apoplectic about this, that there is an opportunity to actually get something done. And Republicans now are kowtowing to Donald Trump. And if you watch Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, from earlier today, he's being so evasive. A reporter asked him, did Donald Trump ask you to do this? He goes, that's absurd. But I talked to Donald Trump at length about this. And Mitch McConnell, I know that Donald Trump wants to run on this. You have the opportunity to do it. Take it. Dan Goldman pointed this out. You do. Right. Well, it's written in.
Where?
We haven't. You can find it on the internet. No, I also want to point out that Congressman Magaziner from Rhode Island pointed out that 52% of migrants that were apprehended in the last 2 years of the Trump administration were released. There's also a Cato report that is worth your time.
85 now, right, and double the number, triple the number.
The point is that Republicans,
300,000 in December.
Republicans have no problem if it's Donald Trump that does it. If something happens under the Biden administration.
So she's absolutely right. Notice what they do every single time. Jessica Tarlov makes a great point, which is basically every time she opens her mouth, she is constantly harangued and harassed and interjected. They try to throw her off her game. They try to gish gallop her because she's outnumbered 4-1. But folks, everything she said was absolutely the case. I'm going to skip ahead here, but go in chronological order in terms of what she brought up. Conservative, prominent conservative, constitutional, legal, and immigration scholars have said there is no basis, there's no credible basis to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Legal expert and regular GOP witness Jonathan Turley. Actually, we'll play a clip from him in just a second. But Alan Dershowitz, who represented Donald Trump in his first impeachment, accused Republicans on Tuesday of using double standards in backing vague charges against Mayorkas when they refused to do so for the former president. Any backers, he said, are distorting the Constitution. The Wall Street Journal their editorial board dropped a critical take on this as well. And then there's also David Byer, who is a Cato Institute researcher. He was actually a Democrat witness in the most recent immigration congressional hearing because he's like, listen, I'm a conservative, and I actually think that the Biden administration has a fairly conservative, when you consider the circumstances, and he would argue a principally conservative immigration policy. And he shredded in a lengthy series of tweets the impeachment resolution brought by House Republicans, bringing up the fact that, very often they're criticizing Mayorkas for not enforcing policies which were overturned by the conservative United States Supreme Court. It's insane, friends. It's insane. I do want to play this real quick clip from Jonathan Turley, and then we'll get into what the rest of House Democrats had to say because they brought up some good points as well. But this is conservative constitutional scholar. They call him a scholar. He's their pet witness in everything that they do, but even he says this is ridiculous. Jonathan Turley.
Mayorkas, while the House does have a tiny little majority of Republicans, the Senate's not going to pass it. They're not going to get 2/3 majority.
No, they're not. But the thing is, look, I don't fault the House. If they have a basis for impeachment, regardless what the other House does, they have an obligation to proceed. I just don't believe that they have a cognizable basis here.
They don't have it. Jonathan Turley has never met a right-wing talking point that he won't twist himself in knots to accommodate. And even he says, folks, this is insane. This is ridiculous. But now I want to play some clips from Magaziner here, who was one of the Democratic Congress people that Jessica Tarlov referenced, because he makes some fantastic points in about a minute debunking the claims of many House Republicans and mocking the absurdity of what they're trying to do.
They are at capacity. So there may be individual examples of certain facilities at certain times that are not at capacity for safety reasons or health reasons or whatever the case may be. But overall, across the system, we are at and above capacity. And so, what should the Secretary do? The Secretary, because he has not received the funding to provide adequate detention capacity, has to use his judgment for who to detain and who to release. That is not illegal. It is certainly not impeachable. And it is the exact same kind of discretion that every other director before him has used. In the last 2 years of the Trump administration, 52% of migrants apprehended at the southern border were released, not detained. 52%, nearly 1 million people. I did not hear my Republican colleagues trying to impeach the secretary or acting secretary under the Trump administration during those years, but here they are trying to impeach Secretary Mayorkas for doing the exact same thing.
Yes, even if they want to complain that the rates are higher, then of course we would need to ask, why are the rates higher? Why is Secretary Mayorkas forced to release more undocumented migrants? That's a separate question. But the fact of the matter is that, as Magaziner points out, under the Trump administration, a majority was still released. So if that's not an impeachable offense, why is this one? Because of course, as again Alan Dershowitz, a conservative attorney, points out, it's a double standard. Eric Swalwell gave us a couple of great clips here too, because he's very rhetorically gifted, and he puts it very bluntly about who's really at fault here in terms of the situation at the border.
And any shortcomings that Mayorkas may have, frankly, are your fault. He's asking for authorities to do more, to have more border agents, to have more resources. And so his limitations are caused by you. You put him in place. You won't let him do it.
He's right. It is. It's House Republicans' fault because they want to use this as a wedge issue. Swalwell goes further as well, excoriating the Republicans later on in this hearing. Again, just a great moment from him.
Bipartisan infrastructure bill, bipartisan CHIPS Act, bipartisan Safer Communities Act to address gun violence, all bipartisan. And we have an opportunity to do a bipartisan border bill and address the threats that I keep hearing here every day. But it's the difference between wanting to weaponize the problem and wanting to solve the problem. And you see so many on their side. Border Patrol agents, God bless them, they're heroes. They'll seize fentanyl, and to just own the libs, they'll say, see, this is Joe Biden's border crisis. I don't understand. Were they not supposed to seize the fentanyl? Like, they got the bad guys. They got the fentanyl. And by the way, 90% of the fentanyl is coming through ports of entry.
Listen, again, everything Swalwell said here is absolutely correct. And right now, there's no question immigration is a hot issue with respect to polling. Recent polling indicates that it's the top issue for Americans. Rightly or wrongly, that's the context in which we must deal. I would argue much of that is because we unfortunately have allowed Republicans to dictate terms of the narrative, which we always do. It's so aggravating. But that's the context. And it's an issue on which Republicans simply poll much better, even if the facts don't support it. We're going to do another video about the situation with the border deal in particular, because it's obviously quite related to the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, but it is somewhat distinct. I'll just say this. This is a bad faith political stunt, right? Again, this is all House Republicans know how to do. They do not legislate. They suck at legislating. It's simply an objective fact. This iteration of Congress, since House Republicans took the majority in 2023, has been one of the least productive iterations of Congress in the history of Congress, going all the way back, I think, second only to the start of the Great Depression, okay? And even that, you know, it would be even less productive than that, especially when you consider that iteration of Congress only met for like a quarter of the year. It met for a fraction of the time, right? This iteration of Congress has not had a Great Depression to deal with, and it's just barely more productive in terms of raw numbers. It's a joke. Republicans don't know how to govern. They don't know how to negotiate. They don't know how to work in good faith. All they know how to do is, you know, take forever to get a speaker, kick speakers out, have to expel members of their own conference because those members are highly corrupt and unpopular, and then just try to impeach President Biden and investigate every person in the Biden family. As a matter of fact, you may remember we did a video about this. One of them, House Republican Virginia Fox, wanted to investigate President Biden's dog. Literally, not a joke, because President Biden's dog bit a couple of Secret Service agents. She thought at the time that we were nearing a government shutdown, that merited a full investigation. That's how the Republican brain works. If you like culture war nonsense, if you like attention-getting, own-the-lib-style energy, then you should vote Republican, because that's what they're good at. If you want a functioning government, regardless if you're conservative, progressive, whatever, you just want a functioning government that's competent and knows how to run a country, you should never, ever, ever vote Republican in any election anywhere, because they just objectively suck at it. Those are the facts. If this makes it through a full House vote, it will die in the Senate. Alejandro Mayorkas will remain the Secretary of Homeland Security until at least January 20th, 2025. That's just a fact. Let me know what you think in the comments.